Hi, and welcome to Cover Brand, where we cover all things branding, marketing, and advertising to help you understand what the hell branding is and how it works to grow your business. Welcome and welcome back. I'm Ethan Decker. Today I have Steve Morris. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing great, Ethan. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. It's good to see you. Um, First thing we like to start with, or at least I do now, tell me about your favorite cover song or a story about a cover band that you've got.
Cool. Yeah. So, discovered this one somewhat recently, but there's a song, Dance Me to the End of Love and it was originally a Leonard Cohen song from way back, right?
Yep.
But there is a band called the Civil Wars who recorded a version of Dance Me to the End of Love. And it was a husband and wife team. Unfortunately, they've since disbanded. But
In more ways than one, maybe.
in more, yes, excuse the pun. The reason why it's on my mind right now is because it's a really great song to dance tango to.
Oh,
And there's a certain timing to it. There's a nice cadence to it. So Kathy and I are learning how to dance tango. So it's nice to have a song that's not too complicated.
yeah.
It's nice and relatively slow, so we can kind of get into the steps. But it's appropriate, right? Dance Me to the End of Love, right? What a
Amen.
beautiful song to tango to.
Well, so Leonard Cohen, for those who don't know, is a famous bard. He is an incredible songwriter, and a lot of his songs end up getting covered by others.
Mm,
Super appropriate that you picked a Leonard Cohen tune.
yeah,
He's a lot of people don't know that the songs they love were written by Leonard Cohen.
yeah. He's been incredibly prolific, and he's had his journey through life, a lot of ups and downs and things like that. So I do like listening to Leonard Cohen, but I do find like a lot of Leonard Cohen can kind of sometimes get me down a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well,
it's nice to hear when somebody else covers it with a little bit more positivity.
yes, he's got a very dark voice, and his musical soundscape is also very dark. You're
Yeah.
right. So
Mm,
it is fun to hear how other people take take his stuff and make it their own.
yeah.
Great, great. I will
Yeah.
look that version up. What's the band's name again?
The Civil Wars.
The Civil Wars, and the song is
Dance Me to the End of Love.
Dance Me to the End of Love. Oh, fantastic. Okay, now let's cover some brand stuff instead of some band stuff. You had a question for me about brand values, was it?
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Tell me the situation.
Well, so in particular, when I'm working with my clients, one of the very first things I do is help them figure out what their core values are, right? Like, who are they at their core as a team, right? And so we go through this exercise. I ask them to name people, not in the room that I'm working in with them, but other people in the business that they admire. That if they could clone these people and had 100 of them, they'd be able to take over the world, right? So they figure out who these stellar A player people are in their business,
Right.
and then we say, okay, why did you pick them? What about their qualities and how do those people show up in the business? Why did they make your team? Right.
Right.
So we end up with a whole bunch of values and
Mhm.
concepts about how those people show up. And then, I work with the team to sort of distill those down. We sort of word group things together
Yeah.
to clumps, right? And then we try to sort of from that word cloud, like pick out what is the real sense of what you're trying to talk about here
Right.
in
Right.
terms of who you are as a team. And so some teams, do better at this than others, right?
Mhm.
It's a range, but it's sort of common for words like integrity and honesty and these sorts of things to show up, right?
Right.
Okay, got it. But integrity, I think Enron had integrity as one of their core values, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of been, everybody says it. So then I've got to work with them, go a little bit deeper into, well, really how does integrity show up in your business that's a way that's unique, right?
Right.
And so maybe they might come up with a slightly different word around that.
Mhm.
But then if we sort of end the exercise there, we end up with a bunch of words. And maybe it's just things like go above and beyond.
Mhm.
The way we do anything is the way we do everything.
Right.
Um, those sorts of things. But then I think there's still more work that can be done.
Yeah.
And this is, I think in terms of branding, is taking these concepts, these abstract concepts like
Mhm.
integrity, and bringing it down to the ground
Yep.
of how does it actually show up in the business? What does that look like? So then people can attach themselves, right, to
Right.
that, right, internally in
Yeah.
the business and then externally in communication and branding, right?
Yep.
So that's where we are. Sort of how do we bring abstract concepts down to the ground and make them tangible?
Yeah, this is a very common issue, and it's a common exercise to say, what are our brand values? What are our corporate values or our company values? Sometimes people separate what they think the brand values are for the external facing brand compared to what are our values as people, as colleagues, as employees, and as employers. And it
Mm.
sounds like you're focused a little bit more on the internal side, first of
Um,
all.
yeah,
But
well, in the work I do with EOS, we try to keep it simple. So
uh-huh,
ideally, I'm coming up with one set of values that are
right.
internal and external, so we can show up authentically, right, as who we
Yep.
are to the
Yep.
outside world as well.
Well, that's one of the first things I would definitely recommend. It's good to hear you're already doing it, which is keep it simple by keeping them the same.
Mm,
Don't say that there's a different set of values for the brand that consumers see versus the set of values that employees use or live by internally. So that's good. You want to come up with those basic core things. It is a common exercise. It's become one of the rites of passage for a lot of brands that grow up, so to speak, is to go through this kind of maturation to define who they are, to codify it, to write it down. And one of those pieces that people often do write down are these values. And I think you're right that, well, as you say, you hear a lot of the same values over and over because integrity matters or effort matters. And what I have found is there's a great tool. It actually comes from an author, I think he's an author, maybe a journalist from Japan almost 100 years ago. And then it got brought over to the States. Roy Peter Clark is a journalist and a writer about writing in the States who loves this concept. The concept is the ladder of abstraction. And it embodies the concept in itself, which is that at the top of the ladder are things that are abstract, like the word abstract, or like the word love, or relaxation or integrity or effort, things that you can't physically touch, taste, or feel, but that matter and that mean a lot of different things. At the bottom of the ladder are words like ladder, things which you can touch and taste and feel and are tangible, things like wedding rings or sweat on your brow or chairs that are old and worn down and have ripped leather seats because they've been used so much. And the way that the concept is used, this latter abstraction, is when you've got something abstract like effort or going beyond, above and beyond. Even that phrase is pretty abstract. You want to ground it, as you say, in something very concrete and very physical and very tangible, like sweat. And sweat is concrete, and we can experience it, and we do experience it so often that it's easier to understand. And then if you can go even further to make these abstracts concrete in terms of a situation, you can do even better. For instance, Nike has a set of values. There you can find it on the internet if you search Nike core values or corporate values. I think somewhere in some of their buildings, they've literally written them on the walls. They are typed up in old typewriter font in the original ones back when Nike was launched or wrote these down in like the 80s. One of them is we are always on offense. Now, it's actually not a completely concrete thing. You can't touch, taste, or feel offense, but it's so much more concrete than saying we go above and beyond or we put in extra effort. and it's also grounded in the concrete experience of sport. When the offense is on the field or when you're on offense, like there's a you can see it, you can visualize it, you know what it's like to be leaning forward and pushing forward. It's a great uh, image that really, as you say, grounds something that could otherwise be pretty abstract.
Yeah.
Does the
Well,
concept of the ladder of abstraction make sense?
absolutely. Yes. And then, what you're talking about with that example is, when you say we're always on offense, like, I mean, that's a stance, right? And people, I mean, yes, it's perhaps not something you can touch, but actually you can physically put yourself in that stance, right? As you're
Yes,
talking about leaning forward, one foot in front
physically
of the
leaning
other,
forward. Yeah.
right? And, one of some people in our community did an exercise where they sort of took integrity, right? That
Mhm.
abstract term, and eventually brought it down to the bottom of the ladder, made it tangible in terms of be like Gandhi, right?
Nice.
So yes, there is, creates this image. We can't reach out and touch Gandhi
But you can see
now,
Gandhi. There
right?
are
We can see him, right? And we can
yeah,
see
he's a real
everything
tangible
that,
person.
yes, embodied, right? And so people can get that. They say, oh, that's what integrity means
Yes.
to us,
Yes,
right?
something that's concrete. That's great.
Yeah.
Another one I know, Nordstrom used to have a book for employees called The Nordy Way. And I don't know if they still use it or employ it. It would be a shame if they didn't. But they took an abstract concept like service, which let's remind ourselves, every single company in the world says that they pride themselves on great customer service. Even if they have terrible customer service, they say this. And Nordstrom grounds it in some very concrete examples, like we will gift wrap a package for someone, even if they bought it at a different store.
Right.
It's yeah,
Goosebumps, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
powerful.
And I think when you can take these abstract concepts, make them tangible around, this a metaphor, an image, something more physical, then people can get it, right? Because you can get it so much more
Yeah,
easily. We will gift wrap a package for somebody, even if they didn't buy it from us. I get it. I've
yeah,
got it. Be like Gandhi. I've got it, right? I know exactly what I need to do,
bingo.
right?
Yeah. I the other thing that's challenging about this exercise of values, A, because people always end up in these very abstract words and then they try and pin it down. But B, if you can get them, if you can introduce the ladder of abstraction and start to uh, get them to think in these terms, be like Gandhi, wrap gifts from somewhere else, always be on offense, leaning forward. There is a resistance by those who want the terms to be universal or completely accurate at all times. And
Mm,
I think you have to let go of some of that urge for precision and accuracy for the sake of impact. Because be like Gandhi, is Gandhi perfect in all ways? No. Does everyone have the exact same understanding of what it means to be like Gandhi? No. But the impact of be like Gandhi is so much more powerful
mm,
than the impact of saying act with integrity.
yeah.
And the impact of saying we will wrap a gift even if a customer bought it somewhere else is, like you said, it's goosebumps. It's a punch to the chest. The impact is so much stronger. And so you have to embrace that, even if it means being a little less precise or less universal. It's just more powerful.
Well, it's interesting, this, what you're talking about here, because in the, how we use core values, how I teach my clients to use core values is not just to have them on the wall,
Right.
right? To actually bake them into day in and day out in the business. And one of
Right.
these is using core values to, to hire people, but then also to review people, to reward them, to recognize them in the business.
Yes.
And we use this rating process. We call it the people analyzer. I know that sounds like a bit of a cold term, but we basically list out the core values, list out the people, and then you just go and sort of, gut assess how are people doing. And the rating system is a plus, means that that person exhibits the core value most of the time,
Right.
not all of the time, right? We're
Sure.
not ever, we're human, right? So it's never 100%, but most of
Yep.
the time is 80%, and then a plus minus is some of the time, right? And then there's a minus, which would be rarely if we get to that case, unfortunately. But it's a very simple thing, but it's not looking for perfection. It's just saying, most of the time or some of the time,
Yeah.
you know, does Fred, step up and exhibit our core values? Does Mary, live these core values most of the time or some of the time? And then that creates a conversation that you can have with the with your employees about where they're doing great, yay,
Right.
great, and companies will give out core values awards, right?
Nice.
Who was the person who was like Gandhi,
Right.
best be like Gandhi person, who wrapped the most gift wrap presents for people who didn't buy stuff at our store.
Right.
Or
Right. Who was most on
here's your
offense?
here's your medal, right?
That's
Who was
great.
best on offense? And then, of course, around that conversation, then you can help people see, okay, for next quarter, here's something that you could work on,
Yeah.
right?
That's
I'd
great.
like to see you be on offense a little more for next quarter.
Yeah.
What
And
would you
sometimes
need, as help to be able to do that, right?
yeah, no, that's great. And having taking those values and going from the abstract to the concrete, using that ladder of abstraction, um, you sometimes you have actual behaviors that you want people to do. Like, Ray Kroc, I mentioned this in a recent episode. Ray Kroc was the guy who turned McDonald's into the global brand it is. I don't think he founded it, but he grew it and blew
Mm,
it up. He famously used to go visit stores everywhere all the time to see how it was doing, and he believed in quality, right? Quality is a great term, but it's abstract. What did he do? When he stepped out of the car, he'd start picking up trash off the sidewalk, not in the store, the sidewalk outside the store,
mm,
because he wanted people to have the cleanliness and the quality of the experience even from when they stepped out of their car.
yeah,
Picking up the trash, picking up the wrappers as the CEO of what became one of the world's biggest brands, that's a great example of a concrete that you could actually do and then feel like you're embodying that value.
mm. No,
Yeah.
that's and to sort of further how we bake these in, creating stories, picking up these stories, right? And these
Yeah.
stories become who we are. And I know from a branding aspect, right? This is what I think you're always trying to do is attach to stories because people can understand stories, right? We are
Yeah.
story people,
Yeah. The
story
concrete
driven.
examples. Yeah, so maybe that's something you could incorporate or a couple things you could incorporate into your exercises at EOS when you do corporate values. One is, okay, we've boiled it down to something like integrity. Now let's make this concrete. And maybe let's use a metaphor from our world, like if it's a sports brand, you use a metaphor from sports, like we're on offense. Or if it's a company, I don't know, that needs an example, you pick an example from their actual lives. What's a great example of integrity from your company and your people that you would hold up as the pinnacle or the penultimate example?
Mm,
And that becomes how you describe integrity. And it's plucked right from the stories of your own employees.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
this is something I do, as I'm working with my clients over usually like a 2-year period. So like a year in, for example, and I every quarter when we meet, we go through the core values. Are these your core values? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Everybody's yes, yes, yes. And then I start, going a little level deeper and I'll start asking them, okay, so could you tell me a story from the last quarter about somebody who went above and beyond? Could you tell me a story about, who was on
Okay.
offense last quarter?
Yeah.
And the first time I do this, sometimes it can be silence in the room. Everybody's kind of looking
Sure.
at each other. It's like, oh, who's got the story? Oh, crap,
Yep.
Steve is asking us. Uh, I didn't realize Steve was going to ask us this, right? But then I
Yeah.
get prepared now, like, oh, we better get our stories straight because Steve's going to
Right.
ask, how are these showing up in the
Yes.
business? They're not
Yes.
just written on the wall. You know, where are they
Amen.
showing up? on our team.
Yeah. And it means you're forcing people to look for them because maybe it's just that they're not noticing or they're not remembering. But when they start to notice and then they start to remember, then they can also reinforce. That's a
Yeah,
great exercise. I love that you do that. That's
yeah.
great.
It brings
Great.
it all together and it helps companies shape their culture around who they are, right? And
Yeah.
then when we have that authenticity of this is who we are inside, and then we can be that outside to our clients, our best customers, to our
Yep.
partners, to our
Yep.
communities where we live in, then I think it makes your life easier, Ethan, in terms of
Sure.
like we have a consistent brand that we can do
Correct.
something with now. Right?
Correct. Yes, and from that sense of the Big B brand, your Big B brand is everything. It's your company, it's your values, it's your employees, it's the trash on the street in front of the restaurant, it's the gift wrapping,
Mm,
right? It's all that stuff. And so, yes, your people are your brand, and
yeah,
you got to make sure that they're living that as well.
yeah,
Well, hopefully, the ladder of abstraction is a useful tool. Hopefully, that exercise with your people and with your clients will become more useful and make their values more concrete so that they can actually live them. And I look forward to chatting again to hear how it goes.
yeah. No, thanks, Ethan. It's a great tool to use. I will be, walking through it with my clients, the ones who aren't quite getting it, like I can use a metaphor, the ladder of abstraction to bring their ideas down to the ground
Yep,
and give them something to execute on. That's
that's
what we're
great.
about. Thank you.
You are very welcome. Good talking to you, Steve, and I will see you soon.
See you soon, Ethan.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Are you planning a big team offsite, a sales meeting, or a large company event, and you want to bring in a speaker who will blow people away? Then your first call should be Oprah. But if you can't get Oprah, call me. Also, if you got something out of this episode, think of one person who might also get something out of it and send it to them as a way of saying, hey, thinking of you.